I'm a 34-year-old man, and this happened to me when I was 31. At the time, I was working as a regional sales rep, which meant I spent a lot of time driving alone between small towns, usually late at night. I've always liked night driving. There's something calming about empty roads and no pressure to rush. That night, I was driving through a stretch of rural Nevada, the kind of place where cell service comes and goes without warning, and the road feels like it's been abandoned by the rest of the world. I had been on the road for hours already, listening to a podcast I wasn't even really paying attention to anymore. It was just something to fill the silence. I remember checking my GPS and seeing that my hotel was still about 40 minutes away. I wasn't tired enough to stop, so I kept going. The road was straight and flat, surrounded by nothing but desert and low hills. No buildings, no houses, no lights. That's when I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Cars pass all the time. But after a few minutes, the headlights stayed the same distance behind me. They didn't get closer, and they didn't fall back. I checked my speed. I was doing exactly the limit. I changed lanes slightly, then went back. The car stayed with me. Then the lights came on, red and white, flashing in my rearview mirror. My stomach dropped immediately. I hadn't done anything wrong, but that doesn't really matter when you see lights behind you in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder. The road was quiet again, except for the sound of my engine ticking as it cooled. I waited. The car pulled up behind me, but it didn't park the way most police cars do. It stopped farther back than usual, almost like whoever was driving didn't want to be too close. That struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. I rolled my window halfway down and waited. A man stepped out of the car. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't have a spotlight on his vehicle. No logo either. It was just a dark sedan. The man was wearing a dark uniform, but it didn't look quite right. His vest didn't say police on it. No name tag, no visible department. He walked up slowly and stopped short of my window. "License and registration," he said. His voice was flat. No introduction. No explanation. I asked him why I was being pulled over. He stared at me for a few seconds too long, then said, "You were swerving." I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't touched my phone, I hadn't crossed the line once. I asked him what department he was with. He told me it was a special task unit and that he didn't need to explain anything to me. That's when I noticed his car again. The lights were still flashing, but there was no blue, only red and white. I hesitated and he immediately got irritated. His tone changed. He told me to step out of the vehicle. Every instinct in my body told me not to. I told him I wasn't comfortable getting out and asked him to call another unit or a supervisor. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer to my window and raised his voice, telling me that I was obstructing an investigation. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slowly rolled my window up a bit and said I was calling 911 to confirm the stop. The moment I said that, everything changed. His hand slammed against my window. He shouted at me to open the door. Not "sir," not "please," just shouting. I started the car. He reached for the handle. I floored it. The tires kicked up dust as I sped off, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I expected sirens. I expected him to chase me. For about 30 seconds, he did. Then the lights disappeared. I called 911 with shaking hands and told them everything. They stayed on the line with me until I reached an actual police station. When I described the car and the man, the officer's face went serious immediately. They told me no unit like that existed. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had stepped out of that car. I don't drive rural highways at night anymore. My name is Emily. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened last winter when I was 26. I live in Ohio, in a small apartment complex on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. 2 floors, outdoor staircases, thin walls, and neighbors who mostly keep to themselves. I'd lived there for about a year at that point, and up until that night, I'd never had a single problem. No break-ins, no noise complaints, nothing that ever made me feel unsafe. That night was a Sunday. I remember that clearly because I had work the next morning and was already annoyed about it. I had just finished washing my face and was changing into pajamas when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just a normal knock. I checked the time on my phone. It was 11:53 p.m. I froze. Nobody ever knocked on my door that late. My friends always texted first. Maintenance never came at night, and if something was wrong, people usually knocked loudly or yelled. I stayed quiet, hoping whoever it was would go away. About 30 seconds passed, and then the knock came again. This time it was harder, more deliberate. My heart started beating faster. I slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness and part of someone's jacket. I couldn't see a face. I asked through the door who it was. "Police," a man's voice said. It was calm, almost bored. My stomach dropped. I hadn't called the police. I hadn't even left my apartment that day. My mind immediately started racing, trying to think of anything I could have done wrong. I asked what this was about. "There's been a report of suspicious activity in the building," he said. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Something about the way he said it felt off, too rehearsed, like he'd said those words many times before. I asked him to slide his badge under the door. There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe he'd left. Then he said, "Ma'am, I don't have to do that." My chest tightened. I knew enough to know that wasn't true. At least, not like that. I asked him to step back from the door so I could see him through the peephole. He didn't move. Instead, he knocked again, harder this time. The door rattled slightly in its frame. I stepped back and told him I was calling the police myself to confirm. That's when my phone rang. The timing was so perfect, it made my blood run cold. The caller ID said emergency services. For a split second, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was real. I answered, and a man's voice came through the phone. He told me officers were already at my door and that I needed to cooperate with them. He said my hesitation was making things worse. His voice sounded official, confident, but something didn't feel right. The connection sounded strange, like it wasn't coming from a real call center. I hung up without saying anything and immediately dialed 911 myself. The dispatcher answered quickly. I told her there was someone at my door claiming to be police and that I'd just received a call saying the same thing. She paused, then told me there were no officers dispatched to my building. While she was talking, I heard something that made my heart nearly stop. The handle on my door moved, slowly, carefully. Someone was trying to unlock it. I backed away from the door, whispering into the phone what was happening. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, turn off my lights, and go somewhere safe if I could. I moved toward the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Then I heard another voice outside the door. A second man. They started talking to each other in low voices, like they didn't realize I could hear them. Then the knocking started again, this time mixed with kicking. The door shook violently. I screamed without meaning to. They shouted, "Police!" again and again, louder each time, as if saying it enough would make it real. I locked myself in the bathroom, sat in the tub, and pulled the shower curtain closed, even though I knew it wouldn't help. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any noise while listening to the sound of wood cracking and splintering. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No voices, no footsteps, just silence. A few seconds later, I heard running down the stairs outside. Real police arrived less than 10 minutes later. By then, my door frame was damaged, but the door hadn't fully broken. They told me similar incidents had been reported across the county. Same method, same late-night knocks, same fake calls, no one was ever caught. I moved out 2 weeks later, and I still don't answer the door at night. I'm 41 years old now, and I worked as a night shift emergency dispatcher when this happened. I'd already been doing that job for over a decade, long enough that very little surprised me anymore. You hear panic every night, people screaming, crying, whispering because they're hiding. Over time, you develop a kind of instinct for what's real and what isn't. You can tell when someone is exaggerating or misunderstanding something. You can also tell when someone truly believes they're in danger. That's why this still bothers me, even years later. It started on a slow shift, sometime after midnight, the kind of night where the radio traffic is light and the phone barely rings. I remember leaning back in my chair, drinking cold coffee, half listening to the hum of the room. That's when a call came through on a non-emergency line from a man who identified himself as a police officer. His voice was calm and controlled. He used the right terminology, the kind you don't usually hear from civilians. He gave a badge number, a unit designation, and said he was calling in a burglary in progress at a rural address just outside our normal jurisdiction. He requested immediate backup. On the surface, everything sounded fine, but something about the way he spoke felt off. Not wrong exactly, just slightly rushed, like he was following a script and worried about forgetting his lines. I pulled up the address he gave me. It didn't exist. I double-checked. Then I tried nearby variations, thinking maybe it was a typo or a rural route issue. Still nothing. I asked him to repeat the address. He sighed audibly, like I was wasting his time. When he repeated it, it was exactly the same. I told him I couldn't locate the address in our system and asked what department he was with. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted. He became sharper, more impatient. He told me I needed to hurry up because a suspect was still on scene. I told him I needed verification before I could dispatch units. He hung up, just like that. At the time, I chalked it up to a bad call or a miscommunication. It happens. But about an hour later, a call came in that made my stomach drop. It was from a woman in a rural area not far from the address the man had given earlier. She was whispering, barely able to speak. She said someone was outside her house knocking on her door, claiming to be the police. She said he was demanding she let him in. As she spoke, all I could think about was that earlier call. I dispatched real officers immediately and stayed on the line with her until they arrived. By the time they got there, the man was gone. No vehicle, no footprints, nothing. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Calls from supposed officers reporting crimes that didn't quite add up. Addresses that were just slightly wrong. Badge numbers that were close to real ones, but not exact. Each time, the caller would get irritated if questioned, as if they expected us to obey without hesitation. Then, not long after, a real call would come in. A terrified person saying someone was impersonating law enforcement outside their home. Knocking, shining flashlights through windows, sometimes trying door handles. It felt like someone was probing our system, learning how we responded, learning what worked. The final call is the one I can't forget. It came in just before dawn. A man was screaming, completely panicked. He said someone was trying to force his front door open. The person outside was yelling that they were the police and that he needed to open up immediately. I could hear banging in the background. I dispatched officers as fast as I could, my hands shaking as I typed. I stayed on the line with him, telling him to hide, to stay quiet, to get somewhere safe. The line went dead before officers arrived. They found the door damaged but intact, no suspect, no vehicle, nothing. No one was ever caught. Eventually the calls stopped. I transferred off night shift not long after that. I don't know who was behind it, but I know this. Whoever they were, they understood police systems well enough to manipulate them. They knew how to sound official. They knew how to create confusion and fear using nothing but authority and timing. And that scares me more than any call I've ever taken.